Analyzing the end of frequency quiz. So first, let's start off with strawman. A strawman fallacy is committed when the refuter distorts an argument's argument so that it can more easily attack it, then demolishes the distorted argument, and concludes that the argument's real argument has been demolished. You might wonder why is strawman called strawman. Let me show you why, and perhaps that will help you remember the fallacy better. So a refuter is said to have set up a strawman, just like how it has set up the distorted argument, and knock it down with the supporting premises of the distorted argument, only to conclude that the real man has been knocked down as well. So that's strawman in short. Now I'll illustrate this with several examples. In example 1, the member for the opposition has proposed that quantum vending machines be installed in the toilets of our universities. His rationale is that if students have decided to indulge in premarital sex, it would be best for everyone involved to protect themselves. This proposal must be firmly rejected. Our contemplative agent society is not ready to accept the members' endorsement of premarital sex. Indeed, encourage it is downright immoral. So for this example, we can see that the refuter distorts the member's rationale by saying that the member is endorsing of premarital sex, when in fact his intention was only to protect the students. He then made the conclusion that the proposal must be rejected based on his supporting premises that we are a conservative agent society and to encourage premarital sex is downright immoral. So here he has committed the strawman fallacy. Next, in example 2, Senator Darrow advocates increased social security benefits for the poor. It's regrettable that he finds it necessary to embrace socialism. Socialism, with its initiative, takes away from his rewards and leads to inefficiency and big government. It was tried and failed in Europe. Clearly, socialism is no good. So in this example, the refuter distorts the argument by saying that Senator is embracing socialism. But social security does not equate to socialism. He then demolishes by elaborating on the disadvantages of socialism and concludes that socialism is no good. But he cannot make that conclusion since that he has committed the strawman fallacy here. In example 3, TV commentator Larry Kudlow argues that government should get off the back of the American businessmen. Obviously, Kudlow wants to abolish government altogether. Yet, without government, there will be no defense, no judicial system, no social security, and no health and safety regulations. None of us want to follow these benefits. Thus, we can see that Kudlow's argument is valid. In this case, the refuter distorts the argument by saying that Kudlow wants to abolish the government, when he only meant that they should stop putting pressure on businessmen. He is clearly exaggerating Kudlow's argument. He then demolished the distorted argument by stating the implications of not having a government and concludes that Kudlow's argument is valid. And here he has committed the strawman fallacy. Now I'll move on to the real life examples. So in real life example 1, the Workers' Party said that the hallmark of a first world parliament is the presence of a significant number of elected opposition MPs. This ensures that the government is held to account to explain and justify to Singaporeans their decision and proceeds in a meaningful way. In which SM Goh refuted by saying, First World Parliament, according to opposition party, is a critical mass of opposition in parliament, and by this definition, almost every parliament in the world is a First World Parliament. That includes Zimbabwe, that includes Myanmar, but that excludes Singapore. And that is too simplistic and that's nonsense. So this is a lecture where we let F be First World Parliaments and O be parliaments with large number of opposition MPs. So in this case, SM Goh distorted the argument of O is F, which is that all parliaments with a large number of opposition MPs are First World Parliaments. Then what Worker parties actually meant and argued for is all F is O. So he then attacked the argument by giving counterexamples to show that not all O is F, and concludes that Workers' Party argument is nonsense, which he cannot have done so since he has committed the strawman fallacy and the conclusion is invalid. Moving on, in the second example which we have identified, we between Bill Shorten and Prime Minister Scott Morrison of Australia. Bill Shorten has proposed to put policies in place to see half of all Australia's new car sales with electric vehicles by 2030, in which Scott Morrison responds by saying, Bill Shorten wants to end the weekend when it comes to his policy on electric vehicles. So you've got Australians who love being out there in their four-wheel drive. I think the problem with this is Bill came out with this last Monday, and it's clearly not thought through. So looking at the breakdown of this example, Morrison has thought that Bill wants to end the weekend, when Bill only encouraged the use of more electric vehicles. Bob Morrison's distortion is actually based on that electric vehicles are not able to travel as far as conventional vehicles, but he has ignored the fact that Bill did include a rollout of charging stations for electric vehicles. So essentially, Bill's policy will not end the weekend. So Morrison has actually exaggerated and misrepresented Bill's policy here. He then demolishes by saying that Australians love their weekend drive and they cannot be deprived of it, and conclude that Bill hasn't thought through his own policy, which is not valid since he has committed a fallacy. So up to this point, are there any questions on the examples and showing? If there are no questions, I'll pass my time on to Cynthia to share about red herring.
Thank you, Ichi. Now, let's take a look at another common fallacy that people often commit, the red herring fallacy. So, a red herring fallacy is committed when an arguer firstly attempts to divert the attention of the reader by changing the subject to an irrelevant but sometimes subtly related one. And secondly, the arguer will then draw a conclusion about this irrelevant issue or merely presume that some conclusion has been established. And lastly, the arguer will purport to have won the argument. So in order to help you remember this better, maybe let me share with you how the red herring fallacy got its name. So basically, its name is derived from a procedure used to train hunting dogs to follow a scent, where a red herring, which is a strong-smelling smoked fish, will be thrown onto a different path in an attempt to divert the dog's attention. Afterwards, in this test, the dog's attention will then be diverted onto another path, and only the best hunting dogs will be able to follow the original correct scent. So in this is similar to how an arguer attempts to divert the attention of the reader by providing irrelevant information. Alright, now let's take a look at some examples to illustrate red herring fallacies. In hypothetical example 1, it states that people think college education is too expensive these days. But the problem is that many of today's college students have no business being in college. They learn practically no math or English in their previous 12 years in school. What we need to do is to improve the quality of our grade schools and high schools. I think I've made my point. So now let's take a look at the breakdown of it to help us better understand this example. So we can see here that the original subject being discussed is how people think college education is too expensive. So logically, we will not expect the arguer to provide premises to support this point. However, the arguer instead attempts to divert the attention of the reader by changing the subject to explain how college students have no business being in school, but this is totally irrelevant to the original subject. And afterwards, the arguer simply presumes that he has established his conclusion that, therefore, there is a need to improve the quality of our grade schools and high schools, and purports to have won the argument by saying that he thinks he's made his point, but he obviously hasn't. And this is why it is a case of the red herring fallacy being committed. Now, moving on to example 2, we've all heard the argument that too much television is the reason our students can't read and write. Yet many of today's TV shows are excellent. Madam Secretary offers a look at the personal and professional life of a Secretary of State. The Big Bang Theory serves out lots of laughs in a highbrow setting, and The Voice presents vocalists from across the country competing with help from coaches. Today's TV is just great. Now let's take a look at the breakdown of example 2. We see that the arguer attempts to divert the attention of the reader by changing the subject from how too much television is the reason our students can't read and write to how there are great TV shows out there. However, this is once again an irrelevant premise, and although it is somewhat related, so because it is somewhat related, it tends to trick readers who are not paying close attention. Afterwards, the arguer simply presumes that some conclusion has been established by saying that today's TV is just great, and purports to have won the argument. But since he has not provided the relevant premises to support his point, it is a case of a red herring fallacy being committed. Okay, next. Example 3 states that we've all heard the complaints that millions of Americans are without sufficient health care. But America's doctors, nurses, and hospitals are amongst the best in the world. Thousands of people come from abroad every year to be treated here. Clearly, there is nothing wrong with our healthcare system. Now, similarly to the previous two examples, we see that the original subject being discussed is whether or not Americans are receiving sufficient health care. However, instead of elaborating on this, the arguer simply provides other irrelevant premises and goes off to praise the American healthcare system and mentioning how many people would travel to America to be treated. However, this is once again irrelevant. The arguer afterwards simply presumes that some conclusion has been established and concludes that there is nothing wrong with our healthcare system and purports to have won the argument. But similarly to the previous two cases, he has not won the argument and instead has committed a red herring fallacy. So now let us take a look at some real-life scenarios where red herring fallacies have been committed. In real-life example 1, when Ronald Reagan, who was the United States presidential candidate at that time, was asked in an interview with Walter Mondale if at 73 years old, was he too old to be the president, he simply replied that he will not make age an issue of this campaign, and he will not exploit for political purposes his opponent's youth and inexperience. Now let's take a look at the breakdown of example 1. We can see that the original subject being discussed here is whether Ronald Reagan is too old to be the president. However, instead of answering this question, Ronald Reagan simply proceeds to explain how he will not exploit the youth and inexperience of his opponent. But this is totally irrelevant to the original subject about his age. Afterwards, Ronald Reagan simply presumes that he has answered the question and moves on. But since he obviously has not answered the question, this is a case of him committing a red herring fallacy. Next, we have another example, which is like the badge lady as well. So, a safe distancing ambassador can be heard telling Miss Poon, otherwise known as the badge lady, to put on her mask. Miss Poon then retorts by asking the safe distancing ambassador, "Who are you? Who are you representing? Where is your badge? Show me your badge." Afterwards, Miss Poon deliberately ignores the safe distancing ambassador's demand and continues on without a mask. So now let's take a look at why this is a case of a red herring. Basically, Miss Poon attempts to divert the attention of the safe distancing ambassador away from the subject of her not wearing a mask by asking the ambassador where is her badge. However, as we can already see, the fact that she's not wearing a mask has no relation whatsoever to whether or not the safe distancing ambassador has a badge. And afterwards, Miss Poon presumes that since the safe distancing ambassador doesn't have a badge, that means that she doesn't have to wear a mask. But this is obviously a wrong conclusion. Afterwards, Miss Poon deliberately ignores the safe distancing ambassador's demands and continues on without a mask, which shows that she thinks that she has won the argument. But since she obviously has not won the argument, it shows that it is a red herring fallacy being committed. So up to this point, does anybody have any questions with regards to the first 5 examples? If not, then I'll pass the time on to Megan, who will be taking us through the next fallacy.
Okay, thank you, Cynthia. So now I'll be sharing on our last fallacy, which is missing the point. So there are 2 important things to take note of when identifying whether missing the point fallacy is being committed. So missing the point fallacy is committed when the premises of the argument support one particular conclusion, but then a different conclusion that is often vaguely related to the correct conclusion is being drawn instead. So to help you better visualize this, you can take a look at the picture on your right hand side. So from the picture we can see that there is a man who is being blindfolded. So he actually represents the arguer who is ignorant of the implications of he's ignorant of the logical implications of his premises, and he ends up drawing a different conclusion that misses the point entirely, as seen from how the darts never hit the bullseye. Yeah, so you can take a look at this picture to help you remember this fallacy better. So now let's see how missing the point fallacy is being committed in an example. So exporting cigarettes to Asia is a good business for America. There is no reason we should be prohibited from doing so. Asians have been smoking for decades. We are only offering variety in their habit. If the Asians made tobacco smoking illegal, that would be a different situation. But as long as it is legal, the decision is up to the smokers. The Asians are just afraid of American supremacy in the tobacco industry. Okay, so let's take a look at the breakdown to see why this is missing the point fallacy. So we can see that the premises support this particular conclusion that Asia should permit America's export of cigarettes to Asia. However, instead of concluding this, the arguer concludes that Asians are just afraid of American supremacy in the tobacco industry. However, we can see that none of the premises actually points towards this conclusion, and that is why the arguer has committed the missing the point fallacy. Okay, so now let's take a look at the second example. Student loan debt is becoming a national crisis. Clearly, we should provide free textbooks to all college students. So similarly, let's take a look at the breakdown to see how we can apply what we've learned. So the premises support the conclusion that we should provide help to students to reduce their loan debt. However, instead of drawing this conclusion, the arguer concludes that we should provide free textbook. However, this providing of free textbook is not a solution that can be logically implied from the premises. As such, the arguer has committed missing the point fallacy. Okay, let's take a look at another example to help you better understand this. Something is seriously wrong with the high school education these days. After 10 years of decline, SAT scores are still extremely low, and high school graduates are practically incapable of reading and writing. The obvious conclusion is that we should close the schools. So let's take a look at the breakdown. The premises all point towards the conclusion that we should improve high schools so as to improve students' performance in the SAT exam. However, instead of drawing this conclusion, a different conclusion is being drawn. So the conclusion that was being drawn by the arguer is that to close schools, which is not addressing the problem, but instead worsening it. Because when schools close, students wouldn't be able to learn anything and their SAT scores would worsen or remain low. As such, the arguer in this case has also committed a missing the point fallacy. Okay, now let's look at some real life example, and this one is committed by a student in an essay. So partially hydrogenated oils are bad for you. A study conducted by Blue Fly in 2015 found that trans fats, which are the fats present in partially hydrogenated oils, contribute directly to heart disease. Heart disease is the leading killer of adults in the US. Dr. Martin of the Institute for Better Betterment agrees with the consensus of many other doctors and nurses that trans fats should not be used in food products sold in the US. There are alternatives in sight. Fortunately, in that regard, trans fats can be reused in snacks and other food products sold in the US by mixing them proportionally with healthier fats. So let's take a look at this breakdown to see how the arguer has committed the missing the point fallacy. Okay, from this, we can see that the premises all strongly support the conclusion that trans fats should be completely eliminated in food products. And this can be seen from the phrases highlighted in green. As you can see, they say that partially hydrogenated oils are bad for you. It contributes directly to heart disease, and that trans fats should not be used in food products sold in the US. But instead of drawing this conclusion, the arguer goes on to draw a different conclusion, which is to reduce trans fat. But this conclusion, there is no guarantee that this reduction will substantially solve the problem that trans fats bring. Neither does any of the premises as seen from the example point towards this conclusion. And that is why the arguer has committed the missing the point fallacy in this case. So let's take a look at our last real life example. This is an example that is committed in our daily conversations. So as you can see, there's a high chance that if you carry on smoking, you will develop cancer sometime in the future. Cancer will be painful and be physically and financially debilitating. And surely you want to avoid that. Therefore, you should lead a healthy lifestyle. So let us take a look at the breakdown of this example. The premises all point towards the conclusion that the person should quit smoking. As seen from the phrases highlighted in green, you can see that they said that smoking will cause you to develop cancer and it will be painful, physically and financially debilitating. However, instead of drawing this conclusion, the arguer concludes that the person should lead a healthy lifestyle. Although quitting smoking is a part of living a healthy lifestyle, However, there are many other factors which encompasses a healthy lifestyle which were not mentioned in this conversation, and thus we cannot conclude them. And the argument in this case has committed the missing the point fallacy. So up to this point, do you have any questions regarding the 5 examples? Okay, if not, I'll pass on the time to Shannon.
Thanks, Megan. Okay, so now we'll be moving on to a quiz. So in this quiz segment, can I get all of you guys to log into the Google Class by scanning the QR code or via the URL link? So in the meantime, I'll be explaining the instructions. So what you're supposed to do is that there's 10 questions in this quiz. And then basically you have to identify the fallacy. So 3 of it is the one that we have covered earlier. And then one of the options would be not a fallacy. So at the end, I will perhaps ask someone to share why you think you have chosen that fallacy, and then I will review the answer and unpack with you guys why that fallacy is committed. Okay, so I think I'll start the quiz now. Okay, so for the first question, it says that it's a good view of thought these days about the need to eliminate pesticides from our fruits and vegetables, but many of these foods are essential to our health. Carrots are an excellent source of vitamin A, broccoli is rich in iron, and oranges and grapefruit have lots of vitamin C. What fallacy is this? Okay, and time's up. So a lot of you guys have said that it's missing the point. However, in this case, it's actually a red herring. Okay, so let's check the breakdown. So why is it a red herring fallacy? Because the original subject here being discussed is about the need to remove pesticides from our fruits and vegetables. However, the arguer here actually diverts the attention of the readers by talking about how the value of fruits and vegetables are essential to our health. So this is a clear example of a red herring fallacy, where he acts as if he has established a conclusion, but it's not the actual conclusion that was to be established, because the actual conclusion that we need to establish here is on the need to remove pesticides from our fruits and vegetables. Yeah. So moving on to question number 2. So in this question, it says, the government workers have signed a petition arguing for better ventilation on the work premises. Unfortunately, air conditioning is expensive. Air ducts will have to be run throughout the factory and a massive heat exchange unit installed on the roof. Also, the cost of operating such a system during summer would be astronomical. In view of these considerations, the petition must be rejected. Which fallacy is this? Okay, and many of you have actually said that it's a strawman fallacy, and that is actually correct. So for those of you who have actually chosen it as strawman fallacy, do you mind sharing why you think it's a strawman fallacy? Yeah.
Yeah, because what the workers are asking for is for better ventilation, but the arguer is saying that they want better air conditioning. So he takes it and tries to know that it's something that's more expensive than it actually has to be.
Yeah. Actually, you hit all the points. So let's review the answer. So the refuter actually distorts the original argument by saying that we need to have air conditioning. However, as what he has mentioned, and he does so by distorting it by talking about massive costs being incurred to install the air conditioners, and then he concludes that the petition is to be rejected. So like what he said earlier, he actually distorted the argument. There's other measures that can be done to ensure that the government workers receive better ventilation, and the refuter here actually distorted it to saying that we need to have air conditioning in order for them to have better ventilation. So this is obviously a strawman fallacy. Yeah, so moving on to question 3. The Student Status Committee has presented us with an argument favoring alcohol privileges on campus. What do the students want? Is it their intention to stay boosted up from the day they enter as freshmen until the day they graduate? Do they expect us to open a bar for them? Or maybe a chain of bars all over campus? Such proposal is ridiculous. Which fallacy is this? So many of you guys have said that it's a strawman fallacy, and yes, it's a strawman fallacy. So can you spot the similarities from the earlier case? Okay, so it is a strawman fallacy because the refuter distorts the original argument for the request of alcohol privileges on campus to mean that the students wanted the school to open chains of bars all over campus. And then the refuter demolishes this argument by implying that the idea of opening bars all over campus is bizarre. And then it goes on to conclude that the proposal is ridiculous and unfeasible. So moving on to question 4. Okay, so this states, to minimize global warming, we need to reduce greenhouse gases. The most serious problem is the risk posed by nuclear weapons in the hands of both states and terrorists. This is where we need to focus our attention and resources. Which fallacy is this? Okay, and time is up. Actually, all of you guys got tricked. The answer is actually not a fallacy because, as you can see from the this passage, it's actually merely stating two separate claims. So the first claim is the one being that in order to minimize global warming, we need to reduce greenhouse gases, and the subsequent claim made is that another more serious that part. So it's basically just making two separate claims. There's no fallacy being committed here. Okay, so moving on to question 5. Okay, so this states, abuse of the welfare system is rampant nowadays. Our only alternative is to abolish the system altogether. What fallacy is this? Okay, yeah, many of you guys have actually got it correct. It's missing the point fallacy. So does anyone want to share why they think that it is missing the point fallacy with the class?
Because they conclude that abuse is rampant. So, I mean, they conclude that we should abolish the system, but the conclusion should be that the welfare system should be protected from abuse.
Sorry?
They draw a different conclusion from what is being stated.
Yeah, actually that is correct. Yeah, so let's review the answer. So yeah, like what we said, the premise do support the possible conclusions that there should be some systematic effort to eliminate the system. However, to eliminate the number of cheaters. However, in this conclusion, the conclusion that was being drawn is to eliminate the whole system as a whole. And this conclusion cannot be logically implied from the premise that was given to us. And we also consider that to abolish the whole system as a whole is considered rather far-fetched. Yeah. So moving on to question 6. So environmentalists are continually harping on the dangers of nuclear power. Unfortunately, electricity is dangerous no matter where it comes from. Every year, hundreds of people are electrocuted by accident. Since most of these accidents are caused by carelessness, they could be avoided if people were to exercise greater caution. What fallacy is this? Okay, so most of you guys have said that it's red herring, and well done, yeah, it's a red herring fallacy. So let's review the answer. Okay, so it's a red herring fallacy because the original subject being discussed here is about the dangers of nuclear power. However, the arguer actually diverts the attention of the readers by explaining the dangers of electrocution. And then he implies that since both are related to electricity, because nuclear power generates electricity, then he kind of shows that he has proven a point. However, a point to take note is that although they are subtly related, they are actually irrelevant, because here we are supposed to establish the dangers of nuclear power itself, like generated from the nuclear plants. Yeah. So moving on to question 7. It states Mr. Goldberg has argued against prayer in public schools. Obviously, Mr. Goldberg advocates atheism, but atheism is quite used in Russia. Atheism is the suppression of all religions and replacement of God by an omnipotent state. Is this what we want for this society, country? I hardly think so. Clearly, Mr. Goldberg's argument is nonsense. What fallacy is this? Okay, that is a strawman fallacy. So let's review the answer. So in here, the refuter distorts Mr. Goldberg's argument as advocating for atheism, when he was merely just stating that we should remove that he's against prayer in public schools and not anti-God. And he does by demolishing the distorted argument by saying that there are harmful consequences atheism has to our society, and giving Russia as an example. And then he therefore concludes that Mr. Goldberg's argument is nonsense. So yeah, this is an example of a strawman fallacy. And moving on to question 8. Crimes of theft and robbery have been increasing at an alarming rate lately. Therefore, we must reinstate the death penalty immediately. Which fallacy is this? Okay, so many of you have said that it's missing the point. Yeah, it's missing the point. So let's see. Okay, so from here, the premise, we can actually come up with the possible conclusion of either providing increased police protection in vulnerable neighborhoods, or you should initiate programs to eliminate the causes of crime. However, the conclusion that was being drawn here is to reinstate the death penalty, and this cannot be logically concluded from the premise that was given to us. So yeah, this is missing the point fallacy. And a point that is worth to take note is that theft and robbery are not capital crimes. Yeah. So moving on to the second last question. Professor Conway complains of inadequate parking on our campus. But do you hear that Conway's eldest son Jasper was convicted a year ago of embezzlement? Jasper managed to steal $500,000 from the First Nation Bank before officials figured out what was going on. It's really important that bank officials be constantly vigilant. Which fallacy is this? Okay, so many of you guys said that it's a red herring. Well done, yeah, it's a red herring fallacy. So let's review the answer. So the original subject being discussed is about Professor Conway's complaint about the inadequate parking in campus. However, the arguer diverts the attention by talking about the crime that his son has committed. And it goes on to draw a conclusion that bank officials should be constantly vigilant. But we all know now that this is not the conclusion that needs to be established. Yeah. So finally, we are on our last question. Okay, so members of the jury, you have heard Mr. White testify that the defendant is not in fact a drug dealer, but Mr. White is a known drug dealer himself and a close friend of the defendant. Also, only a year ago, he was convicted of 5 counts of perjury. Therefore, you should not discount Mr. White's testimony. Which fallacy is this? Okay, so many of you guys have said that it's a straw man, but it's actually not a fallacy. Okay, why is it not a fallacy? Let's take a look at the breakdown. So as you can see, the reasons that were given was that Mr. White is a known drug dealer himself, and he's also a close friend of the defendant. So this just proves why we shouldn't trust him and disregard his testimony. So this is actually a true conclusion being drawn from the premise. So there's no fallacy committed here. Yeah, and with this, I have concluded the Q&A segment. So if there's any questions that you have from us, then feel free to raise them up. If not, thank you.
We'll save the questions till like the last presentation.